Hello my guys, welcome to my video of shame because I started over 40 series in 2025. Yes, you heard that right, and no, I am not entirely sure what has happened over the last year. In 2024, I had a goal to read twice as many sequels as series that I started, and that worked out pretty well for me. I didn't quite hit it, but I was very, very close, and I didn't really have any solid or concrete bookish goals going into last year, but I did want to stay along those same kind of lines because it worked out really well for me in 2024. However, I put absolutely no effort into achieving that number, and man, does it show. So I've got a lot of work to do in 2026 to make up for the mess that I've created for myself in 2025, because we are going to be talking about 50 series total in this video, and that is a 6 series increase on 2024, which actually I don't think is that bad. I obviously want to be going the other way. I want to be reading more sequels and talking about less series total when it comes to these end of year check-in videos, but considering the amount of series I started, 50 series total isn't terrible, but I do think that very much illustrates how little sequels I read across the year, which we are going to dive into in this video. So there is going to be a little bit of a discrepancy between this video and my stats video, which is going to be the next video that you see on my channel, because on the series tracking section of my spreadsheet, which is where I'm getting all of the information that I'm conveying to you guys in this video, it says that I started 41 series, but my general stats page, where all of the pretty graphs are generated, says that I started 44, and I know that that is just a laziness thing on my part. That will be where I have read the first book in a series and I know full well that I have absolutely no desire to continue, so I can't even be bothered adding it to my series tracker. So there is going to be a little bit of an imbalance there, but the amount of series that I've started, whether it's 41 or 44, it is a little bit of an increase on the amount of series that I started in 2024, because that year I started 29. This year I've started obviously at least 41, which is 12 more to start off with. And last year, even though 29 was a little bit more series than I wanted to start, I did manage to DNF 14 of those. Sorry, she stepped on a squeaky mince pie. This year I also DNF'd a lot. I DNF'd 16 of the series that I started, so obviously the ratio of series DNF'd to started this year is a little bit less than it was in 2024. And then there are 25 series on top of that I've either completed or I'm up to date on. Spoiler alert, those are thin on the ground. Or they're ones that I'm going to be trying to carry on with, keep up with the publishing schedule, or finish all of the books that are published in those series to date. We've talked about the series that I've started. In terms of the sequels, honestly, I don't really want to talk about it because in 2025 I only read 26 sequels. And I don't know how I managed it. I am genuinely shocked because if nothing else, I have book clubs that are read-along book clubs, so I'm constantly reading sequels for that. I've picked up sequels generally, like throughout the year. So without putting a conscious effort into it, I understand obviously how it could be a little bit on the lower side, but 26 is not great. And it's also, in terms of continuing on with series, it's probably the worst that I've done in the history of my channel. So like I said, we got a lot of work to do. If you guys do not know, I make a mid-year version of this video in July every year, talking about all of the series that I've read so far in the year to date. And because we're obviously tackling a lot of series in this video, we have 50 to go through today. If they have been mentioned in the mid-year version of this video, I will not be going into any detail about what those series are about or telling you any extensive thoughts on them. I will tell you which ones have been mentioned before, and you can check out one of the mid-year videos if you want a little bit more information on any of those specific series. I do make 2 mid-year versions of this video. One is all of the series that I've DNF'd, I'm up to date on and have completed, and the other one is all of the series that I need to be continuing on with and trying to wrap up in the second half of the year. Once again, spoiler alert, was not very successful in that. So we are going to start off with the DNFs. I have 18 series that I DNF'd in total. That is 4 more than I DNF'd for the entirety of 2024. So that's kind of good. I want to continue to be more realistic about where I actually want to spend my time and which series I actually want to pursue. I want to kind of drop the notion of, oh, book 1 was okay, maybe book 2 will be better, I'll give it a try. If book 1 is not for me. I'm just not going to continue on with book 2. So there are a few series in here that when we will have spoken about them in the mid-year version, I wasn't DNFing them, but upon reflection, I have changed my mind. So before we get into those 18, actually, I do want to talk about 4 additional series that have been mentioned in that mid-year version. So I'll just gloss over them briefly, but these are 4 series that I attempted to continue on with in the year, and I got partway through whatever book in the series I was up to, and I decided that I didn't want to continue the series. So they don't contribute towards the 50 because I didn't finish any installments in 2025, but I just want to let you guys know that I'm not continuing on with these. And if there are any series that you know I'm in the middle of that are not mentioned in this video, for example, the Locked Tomb series by Tamsin Muir, I won't be touching upon that today because I haven't read any installments from that series in the year of 2025, but it is still on my spreadsheet as a series that I'm continuing on with. So cracking into the DNFs, we will start with those 4. They were all included in an episode of Shelve It or Scrap It, where the purpose of the video was to try sequels in series that I wasn't sure that I wanted to continue on with anymore, and in that regard they were very successful. So the first one was the Tyrant Soul series by C.L. Wilson. This one, I think I was trying to read book 3, and that's the one that I DNF'd and decided I didn't want to continue on. I also very sadly DNF'd the Skyward series by Brandon Sanderson. I love Brandon Sanderson, but his young adult work I just don't really think is for me. This one, I was trying to make my way through the novella collection, and I read a singular one of those novellas and then decided that I was done. I also DNF'd the Serpent and Dove series by Shelby Mahurin. I really liked book 1, but when I started book 2, I just realized I didn't really care anymore. And the last one of these was the Newsflesh series by Myra Grant. I don't really like the tone of the characters in that story, and so when I was trying to make it through book 2, I realized it was one of those series where I was just kind of giving it the benefit of the doubt, and like I said, I don't want to do that anymore. So for the rest of the DNFs, 12 of them have actually already been covered in that mid-year check-in video, but 3 of the 12 are ones that I wasn't DNFing at the time that I last told you about them. So for those ones, I will touch upon why I've now decided to DNF. But for the 9 that have already been mentioned, the first one is the Law of the Wild series by Annalisa Brana. I actually featured this book in my worst books of 2025, which tells you everything. I also DNF'd the Firebird series by Claudia Gray. This one was just okay. Didn't really feel like I wanted to continue. I also DNF'd the Oak and the Holly cycle by K.A. Lind after book 1. I also covered The Night Ends with Fire by K.X. Song, and also the Fall of the Dragon series by, I think, Amber Chen is the author of that one. Those 2 I wasn't invested in the first book enough to want to continue. I also DNF'd the Fire That Binds series by Juliet Cross after book 1. The Dark Olympus series by Katie Robert. I did really enjoy this one, but I don't think I'm going to continue. I also read The Devils by Joe Abercrombie, and I'm not interested in continuing that series. I've now decided that Joe Abercrombie is not for me. And I'm also DNFing the Wilder Song trilogy by Meg Ducey. Once again, I enjoyed book 1, but not enough to want to continue. So the 3 that weren't DNFs the last time we talked about them are the Twisted series by Anna Huang. Book 1 in this series was a very entertaining read for me, and I thought that I may continue. I knew that I wasn't going to continue with any kind of urgency, but I still, at this point, wouldn't be necessarily mad if I was, I don't know, at a resort and the only book that I had available to read was the second book in this series. I would read it happily, but if I have all of the other books in my library to choose from, I'm probably not going to continue on with this. So this is like not a hard DNF, but I also think it's unlikely that I'm going to continue. The Beasts of Briar series by Elizabeth Helen. So we all know I'm not a fan of reverse harem. I have just given up on reverse harem and poly romances at this point because they just never work for me. This one was one of the ones that I actually enjoyed in the genre. However, once again, I am not going to continue this with any urgency. If I have literally all of the other books around me to choose from, I'm not going to pick up the sequel in this series, so it may as well not be on my series list anymore. And the last of the ones that we've already spoken about was the Lady of Darkness series by Melissa K. Rorich. Once again, one of the installments from this series was on my worst books of the year. This one was the series we were reading for my Patreon book club, but I DNF'd it in book 4 because I just could not continue. I found it so long-winded and tedious. As for the 6 that we haven't spoken about, the first one is The Study in Drowning, I'm assuming Duology by Ava Reed. This is one that I read and I enjoyed. I actually gave this one 4 stars, but I was in 2 minds whether I wanted to continue. This This is the story of a girl who is studying, I think, fairy tales. She has this author that she absolutely loves, and she's given the opportunity to work on a project after his death and like go to his estate. So she ends up going there with a rival academic from the same university as her, and the house is waterlogged. Like, I don't understand how it's still standing. It's in this isolated seaside town, and there is water dripping from the walls. It is like the thought of walking into this house and the way it was described makes me shiver, and I loved those elements of this book. And as the main character is exploring the legacy of her favorite author, she finds out that things are potentially not exactly as she thought. And you know, they do say that you shouldn't meet your heroes, which is definitely the case in this book. I think my issue with this is that it was a fantasy book. I actually think that this should have been a horror, and that Ava Reid should really have lent into those elements. And I think this would have been a 5-star read for me if it would have been a horror, and some of the elements would have been adapted to put it more firmly in the horror genre. I didn't love the way that this ended. I also think it would have been an excellent standalone, and I also didn't love the fact that there was a romance in here and the way that that was kind of depicted. So after sitting with this for a couple of months, I've decided that I'm not enthusiastic enough about this to continue on with the sequel, and I'm also no longer keeping this one on my shelves as well. I had very mixed feelings about it. Things I loved, things I didn't like, but we're not carrying on. I also am unfortunately going to be DNFing the Drowned Empire series by Frankie Diane Malice. I am quite upset about this because I had very high hopes for it. This one is sold as like a Cleopatra meets Roman Empire kind of story. I honestly could not tell you anything really about the plot at this point, and that was my main issue with it. Like, I just couldn't get engrossed. I couldn't get absorbed in this. I felt like it lacked a lot of world building. There were a lot of elements that were kind of thrown in. Like, I think they travel around on birds, but that segment of the world was never given enough attention within the narrative for me to get a full picture, and I need to be immersed in a story to really enjoy it. Like, I love description, I love a well-established setting, and this really lacked that for me. And so I found that when I was trying to follow the plot, I was a little bit lost in the world. There were elements that I liked about it. I think the romance actually had some great chemistry, and that is the one thing that I was enthusiastic about in this. But unfortunately, I think that I just didn't get situated in the story enough to properly enjoy this one, so I won't be continuing on. Another Roman Empire story that I had high hopes for was This Monster of Mine by Shalini Abesakara. This is a gorgeous fairy loot edition as well, and I'd heard really good things about this one. This one is about a girl who survived an assassination attempt, and she returns to the place where this attempt was made on her life to try and get to the bottom of who tried to kill her and why they did that. So she was following her dream the first time that she went to this place, but after she almost lost her life, she had to leave her dreams behind, and she's returning as not a justiciar, I think she's a prosecutor, and she ends up assigned to work with a sadistic judge who she actually suspects was responsible for trying to kill her. So she's going to dig around and try and find out why. I just didn't have a good time with the first half of this book. I was really struggling to get through it. I do think it picked up in the last 100 pages, which is why I was thinking about maybe continuing on, but once again, after having sat with this for a while, it didn't really leave a lasting impression on me, so I don't really want to continue. I'm also DNFing the Broken Empire series by Mark Lawrence, the first book being Prince of Thorns. This is another book that made it to my worst books of the year list. This one is following a young man who sees his mother and I say young man, he's a child. He sees his mother and his brother killed, and he expects his father to take revenge on the kingdom that assassinated his family, and his father just settles for like a trade deal negotiation and moves on, and that does not satisfy the main character's need for revenge. So he breaks out a bunch of criminals from the prison and asks them to follow him to this other kingdom to get revenge for the death of his family. My main issue with this is that I've read the Book of the Ancestor series by Mark Lawrence, the first 2 books, and really enjoyed them, and this was a very simplistic narrative in comparison. The Book of the Ancestor has a much more detailed descriptive writing style, a lot more complexity, a lot more intricacy that I felt was lacking in this series. And I also felt like I had to suspend my disbelief a little bit, because we are following a child who is leading this band of mercenaries, and yeah, I know he's a prince. Yeah, I know that he's promised them something that they want, but I also know that, and I'm generalizing a little bit here, okay, but criminals, not all of them have the most foresight. They're not going to follow a child blindly for the promise of something that may never appear when it's very likely that they're going to get killed along the way. So this one is a miss for me. It had a little bit of an element of the world that I found interesting, but not really being able to believe or get behind the main character, and not really being interested in the plot, with a writing style that I just found lacking in comparison to what else I've read from Mark Lawrence. I'm not going to be pursuing this one any further. And one that I know is going to be very sad for a lot of you, I'm not going to be continuing the Graceland series by Kristen Kershaw. I read book 1, which is about a girl called Katza, I think, yes, who has the grace of killing, which means that she's very good at it, and she is trying to find out who kidnapped the grandfather of a different kingdom. So she teams up with, I'm pretty sure he's the prince of the kingdom, to find out the motivation for this kidnapping. This one is an isolated story, it's a standalone story, although I do believe we follow different threads of the plot throughout this world, and we follow different characters in it in the sequels, and I just thought it was okay. And this was published quite a number of years ago now. I think it's a 2008 release, and I feel like this very much forms the backbone of the popular young adult fantasy that came after it, and also a lot of the things that we see in the romantasy genre. However, at this point, I've seen things like this executed so much better. So while it was nice to see their origin points, I don't really have much interest in carrying on with this series. I know that you guys have begged me in my comments to read Fire, which I have just on hold because I've decided not to continue on with this series. I understand that it may be better than Graceland, but I don't really have any desire to pick it up, and so the likelihood of me enjoying it when I'm going into it with that negative attitude already is very, very slim. And the last series I'm DNFing, I almost forgot because I originally had this in the section of series that I'm up to date on, is the Faebound series by Sarah L. Arifi. I read book 2 in 2025, which was Cursebound. I have a love-hate relationship with Sarah L. Arifi because I really like the first 2 books in the Ending Fire series, but I don't like book 3. I liked Faebound, didn't love it as much as the Ending Fire books, but I enjoyed it, and then I didn't like Cursebound. So I'm looking at Sarah L. Arifi's 2026 release, which is Cleopatra, and if I don't like that one, then I'm done with Sarah L. Arifi, which is a real shame because I loved the first 2 books in the Ending Fire trilogy so much. But this one in particular is set in a world where there were elves, fae, and humans, but now only elves remain, and we are following 2 elven sisters, one who is a general and one who is a seer. The one who is a seer is called Lettel, and she gives her sister Yeren, the general, a prophecy that says she's going to find glory in the east. So when Yeren goes out on this dead-end mission, she remembers what her sister has said. She tries to seek glory in the east, and she gets ambushed, which results in her being exiled from the elven lands. So Lettel, feeling loyal to her sister and also partially to blame, follows Yeren into exile along with Yeren's second in command, and they stumble across the land of the fae and learn things about their elven society that really disrupts their belief in their own people. So the series that I completed in 2025, I have 5 of them. That is all. That is 5 less than in 2024. I am setting myself a goal for 2026 to complete 12 series. That's 1 series per month. And spoiler alert, I have already completed 2. 2 of the series we're going to talk about today in a later section, I have now already completed. So fingers crossed that that is a goal that I can achieve, because 5 series completed is wild, especially because 4 of them we have already spoken about in that mid-year check-in, and they are The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey. This was a duology and I finished book 2. Wheel of Time, I think I read the last 3 books in 2025, and my am I glad that that series is over. The Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne. This is one that I've only finished in the latter half of the year, but I read the entire thing in 2025 for my book club and I enjoyed it a lot. And then This Poison Heart by Kaylin Bayron. This one is a young adult duology. I really enjoyed book 1, which we spoke about in the first half of the year, and then I've since read book 2 and it was actually my worst book of 2025. So that one did not end well. But the other one that we haven't spoken about is the Crimson Moth duology by Kristen Cicerelli. This was one of my favorite books of 2024, and if you're up to date on this little 2025 wrap up I'm doing, you will know at this point that the sequel to this, Rebel Witch, is not one of my favorite books of 2025. I think it was okay, I just don't think it was as good as the Crimson Moth. But this one is a fantasy romance between a witch and a witch hunter. The main character was born into a world where witches were on top. They ruled the world. A lot of witches were integrated into the society, and there was a revolution that was led by the witch hunters that rose up to take down the witches. They didn't exist before, and this resulted in her having to turn over her own grandmother to the witch hunters with her grandmother's blessing to save her own life. And in the years since, she has discovered that she too is a witch, and she has devoted her life to saving witches from execution under the guise of the vigilante, the Crimson Moth. So our love interest is actually the leader of the witch hunters, who was one of the people that spurred on the witch hunt that like overthrew the government and killed the main character's grandmother. But these two end up fake dating because somebody tips the witch hunter Gideon off that the main character Rune may be the vigilante, the Crimson Moth that they've been hunting for, and Rune is trying to get in with Gideon because she is trying to find out the location of one of her grandmother's closest friends, who I think is called Seraphine, and who is a very powerful witch. The sequel to this was fine, like it was a good book, I enjoyed it. I just think that there was a lot of plot. I think this series, as I always think actually, I think this series would have benefited from being a trilogy as opposed to a duology, because the change in pace between the two books was drastic, and we had a lot of plot packed into that second book, and I think it could have just done with like a little more room to breathe, and it would have been a more enjoyable reading experience for me. But I still enjoyed this, and I still really like the series. I'm up to date on 5 series, which is pretty good. None of these we have spoken about in the mid-year check-in as well, because all of the series I was up to date on at that point were also DNF, so they're all in the DNF category. This is one less series than I was up to date on at this point last year as well, and up to date means that I read all of the books available in that series that were published up to 2025. So we're going to be splitting this into 2 sections, ones that have a sequel with a release date for 2026 and ones that don't. So we'll start with the ones that do have that 2026 sequel release date, the first one being the Stonegate series by LJ Andrews. I started 2 series by LJ Andrews in 2025, and I enjoyed both of them. This one is inspired by Norse mythology, and it's following a young woman who is a bone melder. This is quite a rare, I think actually unique ability in every generation, and melders are highly coveted by the king. So she has been living in hiding, but one day I think they're doing like betrothal celebrations for the prince, and the prince's bodyguard ends up in her village and notices that she has a power and drags her back to the king, who then starts to use her ability for his own gains. And this puts her in contact with an opposing kingdom who have very different beliefs on the melding ability. They think it's an abomination, whereas the country that she's from think that it's something to be celebrated and used to strengthen the kingdom. As this book progresses, she starts to get closer to the silent and stoic bodyguard of the prince, who is the one who dragged her off into this imprisonment anyway. I did struggle a little bit with the world building of this one, and I don't love the magic system. I don't think there's enough in here to differentiate our main character from the other type of magic wielders that we have, and I thought that the way that they were categorized was a little bit confusing. But I really loved the chemistry between the main character and the love interest, which is something that so far remains consistent for me throughout LJ Andrews' books. So I had a really good time with this one, and I'm very excited for the release of the sequel. Hopefully I'll be able to read it soon, because I think I remember enough about this to continue on with this series at this point. The next one is the Stonewater Kingdom by Rachel Gillig. This was in my best books of the year. Check that video out if you haven't already. But this one is a fantasy that does also have a strong romantic plot, following a diviner who has to team up with a heretic knight to track down her other diviner sisters who have all gone missing. This one took me by surprise because I expected it to be really gloomy, moody and gothic, and atmospherically it does have a lot of that, but the tone, especially within the dialogue, is a lot lighter and funnier than I thought that it was going to be, and I actually really enjoyed that juxtaposition between the lighter moments, and one of the characters in here provides great comedic relief through the entire thing. But then we also have a sense of like loneliness and a bittersweet note underpinning this entire novel, and I think that the way that these two balanced really spoke to me. Also within the romance, they have a dialogue style that reminds me a lot of classic literature, things like Pride and Prejudice, Wuthering Heights, like big declarations of love, which I just ate up. So I'm very excited. This is just going to be a duology. I haven't read the sequel to One Dark Window yet, so I don't know how Rachel Gillig typically ends duologies, and like I said, I prefer a trilogy. Just give me more. So hopefully the sequel to this will be just as good as the first, and I'll come out of it feeling like it wrapped up the duology adequately. Another one of my favorite books of the year was Shield of Sparrows by Devney Perry. This was a 5-star read in December for me, and the sequel is released in April, so I'm so excited to get it in my hands. But this one is following a princess who is forced into marriage to the prince of a different kingdom to uphold a treaty called the Shield of Sparrows. This is a world that is full of monsters, and the treaty was created to stop the kingdoms from warring with each other when they had this much bigger threat from these giant eagle-like monsters that migrate every generation. And as our main character is traveling to this other land to live with her husband, she has been given a mission by her father to infiltrate this kingdom and feed him information, and also to kill the legendary monster hunter, the Guardian, who she ends up finding herself quite drawn to when her husband seemingly doesn't really want to be around her or spend any time with her. Once again, loved the romantic tension in this one. You can hear so much more about it in my best books of the year video. I think that Devney Perry did a very good job of blending things that we are very familiar with in fantasy romance and also putting a little bit of a unique spin on it, and the plot twists were very unexpected and blew me away. So for ones that do not currently have a release date for a sequel in 2026 as far as I'm aware, we have Terror at the Gates by Scarlett St. Clair. Oh my god, look, another one of my best books in 2025. This one is an urban fantasy following a woman who moves from the most prestigious area of the city of Eden to the place that is known for indulging in sin, and she is trying to earn her own keep down there, and she steals a little bit from time to time to be able to do so, and she ends up stealing this dagger that kills everybody that it touches apart from seemingly her. So she teams up with a guy who runs this underground of sin, Zahariev, to try and find out what this artifact is, why it kills everybody, and why it is not harming her. This to me perfectly blends the conventions of old school urban fantasy, like the Fever series by Karen Marie Monin and the multitude of series that have that very similar vibe, and also more modern urban fantasy like Crescent City, which I think worked out really well for me because I think that those older series to me have main characters that grate on my nerves a little bit, and I feel like the characters and the romance being modernized in this with the same kind of setting as those older series really worked for me and ended up selling me on the genre. If there is more modern urban fantasy like this, then I feel like I would read it when it's previously a genre that I didn't have a lot of interest in. Once again, as well, great romantic tension. And then the last book I have for this category, honestly, I'm not even sure if it should be in this video, because that is Cry Voidbringer by Elaine Ho. Now, the US, I think maybe the UK Finnish copy of this as well, because this is an ARC that was sent to me by Solaris, says a novel on the front, which to me implies that it's a standalone. And for the majority of this book, I assumed that it was. It felt like a standalone. And then I got to the last like 50 pages and it felt like a start of a series. So I don't know if there's even going to be a sequel to this. It just feels to me like there has to be. However, I'm not sure if I would continue. I did enjoy this book, but not in a way where I feel enthusiastic to read more from this series. This one is a dark fantasy following a group of people who live under this oppressive regime. One of our main characters is Hammer, and she was part of a blood tithe that the surrounding communities give to the leader of this place to build their army. So she's essentially just a faceless soldier, and she is tasked with looking after this godchild who is somebody who has rare and potentially powerful abilities, thinking that this ability is going to amass to nothing as the majority of the godchildren in the past. However, this child is actually gifted with a very powerful and useful ability that could help them turn the tide of the war against the empire that they are fighting. This is the most depressing book I've read in a while. Everything that could possibly go wrong for anyone in this book does, and we were just on, like, we thought that it was bad when this book started, but you get to a point where you're just on a steady downward trajectory right the way to the end of the book. And you know what? If it had continued like that and ended like that, that would have been fine, but I feel like it ended on this final note of hope that feels like it's leading into a sequel. So like I said, I feel like I've had my fill of this story, but I'm not even sure whether this is a series at all, and I haven't seen any news about the sequel as of yet. And then of course we have the largest section of this video, which is all of the unfinished series that I have either started or made progress on across 2025. There are 22 of these, which I believe is 8 more than at the end of 2024, so that of course is not ideal. And I have, as always, split these into 2 sections. So there are the series that are completed, so all of the books in that series are currently published, I just have not read them yet. And then we have all of the ones that are currently publishing, so there are some books out and I haven't read all of them, but then there are also more books to follow in that series. So the good news is that while we do have 22 books total, I have already spoken about 13 of them in my mid-year check-in. So the ones that I've already spoken about from completed series, we have the Chorus of Dragons series by Jen Lyons. I read just book 3 in this series in 2025. The Pretty Little Liars series and Sarah Shepherd had a good run with this, but did not quite make it to the finish line, and I read books 10 to 12 in 2025. The Deal by Elle Kennedy, I read the first 2 books in this one. The Fallen God series by Hannah Kana, once again I read the first 2 in this one. There's so many series that I just needed to finish the last book and I would have been done. So I'm hoping to get through that right at the beginning of 2026. Keep your fingers crossed for me because it never works in my favor. We have the Legends of Thesmar series by Helen Shara. I just read the first book this year, but this is actually now my current Patreon book club read. So we're going to be reading the entire series, and that will, provided I continue to enjoy it, definitely be done by the end of the year. I also started the Remnant Chronicles and I just read book 1. And I also started the Caraval series by Stephanie Garber and only read book 1. So for the ones from this category that I have not mentioned, we have the Lycanius trilogy by James Islington. I have now finished this. This was the first book that I finished in 2026. It was the book that I was reading throughout the entire end of 2025, and I did not manage to finish it before the end of the year, and I'm so mad about it. But this one is an adult epic fantasy series. I reread book 1 because it had been a while. I think I started this series in either 2022 or 2023, and this year, in case you missed it, I have made a video called Reread and Resume that contains 10 series where I would like to reread book 1 and then make it a priority to continue on with the series, and the Lycanius trilogy was the first series that I actually completed for that project. So hopefully we will have a much better version of this video in 2026 when I've made it through at least 2 or 3 more of those. But this one is an adult epic fantasy trilogy following a boy called Davian who lives in a world where there used to be these godlike creatures called Augurs. However, they were overthrown, and there are other people in the society that have a lesser version of the Augur power called the Gifted, and they are very tightly regulated. And Davian is a gifted, but he can't seem to use his power, and he very quickly finds out that that is because he's actually an Augur, and he is sent on a mission with this precious artifact to head to the north of the world and help to reinforce a border that is keeping all of the monsters and the evil of the world trapped behind it. So I read books 1 and 2 throughout the second half of 2025. Book 3, like I said, is already done, so we will be talking about this in my mid-year check-in. One of the reasons why I wanted to finish this so bad is so I didn't have to talk about it twice, but here we are. Another series where I read 2 books and just did not read book 3 is the Broken Blade series by Mike Holland. I actually really enjoyed this one. I went into it with very mixed feelings because I'd heard very mixed reviews, but this one is a multicast heist story following the 5 Broken Blades. So 5 people who are selected for their individual skills to assassinate the king, on top of each having a unique ability that makes them perfect for this job. They are all people who don't really have anything left to lose, which makes them desperate enough to make an attempt on the king's life. Now, this does absolutely nothing new for the fantasy heist genre, but I do think that it is very much in line with all of the things that I enjoy about books in the fantasy heist genre. It's a little bit predictable. Everyone is paired up romantically, and they just so happen to be paired up with the person that they're traveling with, because everyone is traveling in pairs in this first book. The sixth person that we have is somebody who is accompanying one of the broken blades, and so I found it to be very enjoyable. The audiobook is full cast, which I loved, and I'm excited to finish book 3 to wrap up this series. And I also have my eye on Mike Holland's 2026 release, which I think is a romantasy. I also read Our Dining Table by Mita Ori, and when I picked this one up I actually thought that it was just like a little one-shot manga. However, I did realize that there was a follow-up that was published in October of this year that I haven't got my hands on yet. But this one is following a boy and his younger brother who meet a man in the park who knows how to cook. He doesn't like to eat in front of other people. He has some issues going on, so he takes his lunch out to the park, and this little boy approaches him, asks what he's eating and if he can have some, and the boy thinks that this is delicious, so he asks the man to teach him and his older brother to cook because they have lost their mother and they're struggling a little bit. So then these two older boys bond over the shared experience of learning to cook for the benefit of this little boy that his older brother is like trying to look after but really struggling. This is not one of my favorite mangas that I've ever read, but it was definitely a very sweet and heartwarming one, so I will pick up book 2 if I happen upon it. The other series that I've already finished this year is the Blood and Bone series by John Gwynne. This one could not be helped. It's the follow-up to the Faithful and the Fallen series, which we're reading for Catch Up Book Club. The live show for the final book in this trilogy was in January. It's already up on my channel if you want to check it out, and so I had to read it in January, so I didn't quite get all of the books of this trilogy into 2025, but this one is set 150 years after the events of the Faithful and the Fallen, where the regular citizens of this world are dealing with the aftermath and the exchange of power that happened after the conclusion of the Faithful and the Fallen. It very much deals with topics of good and evil and power and corruption, and has a deep like underlying theme of systemic abuse within institutions that I thought was really interesting to explore within this fantasy setting. Really enjoyed this one overall, though not quite as much as the Faithful and the Fallen, and you will be seeing another John Gwynne series that I will have finished by the end of 2026, because the next series that we're tackling for Catch Up Book Club as an add-on to this read along is John Gwynne's Blood Swan Saga. I have an announcement video for that if you'd like to join us. I also read the first book in the Aaron Falk series by Jane Harper. That was The Dry. This one is a detective series, so this is one where I'm not 100% sure if I'm ever going to continue on. If I'm being honest, I would say that it's highly unlikely that I will continue this series, so if I never mention it again, don't be surprised. But this one is following a man who works for the police. He's Australian, and he goes back to his hometown to attend the funeral of his best friend who has been accused of murdering his wife and his child and then also killing himself. So this is a very small town, and they're also struggling a lot right now because there's a drought and it is a farming community, so money is very, very tight, which is believed to be the motivation for the detective Aaron's best friend doing what he did. And after his best friend's mother begs him to investigate the case, he starts to look into what was going on surrounding the time that his best friend, his wife, and their child was killed, and to figure out whether it was his friend who was responsible or whether something else was going on. I didn't love this because it is very much like a detective story, and while I like thrillers, I prefer to follow, you know, like the paranoid housewife who's always peeking out of the windows and spying on the neighbors, as opposed to an actual detective, even though this man is more like he investigates things like fraud and things to do with money, not homicide. But I felt like it very much followed the conventions of a detective story. Given how the story unraveled, I would be interested to read from Jane Harper again in the future. I just don't necessarily think that I would prioritize following this series as opposed to picking up something different from Jane Harper. So I'm 50-50 on this one. I also read the first book in the Smoke Thieves series by Sally Green, which is of course The Smoke Thieves. This one is a multi-perspective young adult high fantasy series, and I've discovered that I just love those. Like a very typical classical high fantasy background with a multicast of characters. I eat it up. This reminded me a lot of like The Demon King by Cinda Williams-Chimer, which is another series that is going to make its way onto a reread and resume video at some point because I really want to continue. So this is very much the same thing. It surrounds demon smoke. One of our characters is a thief and she harvests smoke from demons, which when it is inhaled by humans, it's a very potent drug, and she loses this bottle of demon smoke that she's stolen, and we follow a bastard prince in here who is living like out in the countryside with his mother. He doesn't know that he's a prince at the beginning, and he has this compulsion to steal, so he's the one who steals the smoke from her. We have somebody who has traveled from a distant land to find this bastard prince so that they can kidnap him and like have leverage over his father. And then we also have a princess who is betrothed to the prince of a different kingdom, and she's in love with her bodyguard, and the bodyguard is a perspective, and he thinks that something nefarious politically is going on and that the princess is going to be collateral damage in it. So even though he has been sacked and like banished from his post for being in love with his princess, he is desperate to find her to warn her of what's to come. So lots of hijinks, lots of fun. Really enjoyed this one. I do think that this is going to be a reread and resume series as well, which I know, lofty goals, because I have a big backlist before I even make another video and add all of these extra series on. But I do think it's one where I want to collect the sequels and then read them close to each other, because multicast series like that can get a little bit chaotic, especially when they're reminiscent of other series that I've read and enjoyed. So I feel like it's best to kind of just like pull them aside and read them together so that you can more easily follow the thread. And then one of the last series that I started this year was Winter House by Ben Gutterson. I am once again in two minds whether I'm going to continue on with this. I do like a middle grade story from time to time, but I do struggle to prioritize them and keep up with them. Like I haven't continued the Amari and the Night Brothers series, and I really enjoyed book one, but this one is following an orphan girl who is abandoned at Christmas by her aunt and uncle who go on holiday, and they send her to this random hotel. When she gets there, she expects it to be a horrible place because her aunt and her uncle aren't very nice to her, but it's this place full of like wonder and mystery, and she finds a book in the library that helps her start to unlock the secrets of the hotel. Really enjoyed this one. I love a middle grade that introduces you to a fun concept like this hotel and then spends the whole book exploring it. I also read this at a perfect time around Christmas, which is when it is set, but we'll see whether I ever prioritize picking up book 2 and 3. And then finally, we just have the 8 series that I need to continue on with that are also currently still being published. So of these 8, I have already spoken about 6 of them. One of those is the No Other Gods series by Piper CJ. I read book 1 in 2025. I do have book 2, and then I think book 3 is being published in 2026. I also read This Woven Kingdom by Tahara Murphy. I thought that this was a trilogy and that it was complete, but it's actually a 5-book series. Book 4 was just published and book 5 is still to come. I'm going to wait for book 5 and then once again try and read them all back to back after rereading this one. So yes, another potential reread and resume series. My length of series to go on reread and resume videos is longer than my arm. Honestly, I've started making a second list for when I've made it through this list that's going to take me over a year to get through. We also have the Coven of Bones series by Harper L. Woods. I have no idea how long this series is going to be, but I think books 2 and 3 were traditionally published because I think the first 2 books were released indie. 2 and 3 were published in 2025, I think. And then I think book 4 is coming in 2026. I have no idea how many installments are going to be in this series past that though. We also have A Fire in the Sky by Sophie Jordan. Book 2 was released in 2025. Book 3, I'm assuming, is going to be coming in 2026. Once again, no idea how long this is going to be in total. Heavenly Bodies by Amani Ariyu. Until very recently, I assumed this was going to be a trilogy, but I believe it's actually going to be 5 books. So book 2 has just been released towards the end of 2025. Book 3 is coming in 2026, and then we have 2 more to follow. We also have the Dungeon Crawler Carl series. So I read 3 books in 2025. I listened to the audiobooks, and I believe 7 books have been published in this one so far, and the 8 is going to be the final one, and I'm assuming it's going to be released at some point in 2026, although I don't know that for sure. And then the 2 that I haven't mentioned to you guys, we do have the return of LJ Andrews with the Eversea series, starting off with the Ever King. This is a series that is broke down down into smaller components. So the first 2 books are a duology. Book 3 was also published in 2024 because this is once again a book that started indie and has been picked up by traditional publishers. So book 4 is going to be released in 2026. I think there's 6 books in total. Books 3 and 4 are standalone romances within this world with an interconnected plot, and then I don't know what books 5 and 6 are going to be. But the first little duology in this world is following the King of the Everseas and the Princess of the Land Fae, and the King of the Everseas has been trapped behind this barrier in the sea, and the princess, our main character, accidentally releases him, so he comes to land to reclaim a kernel of his father's power that was stolen by the King of the Land Fae. But finding the king missing when he arrives, he's gone on a trip somewhere, he kidnaps the daughter, assuming that the king is going to come and give him the kernel of power in exchange for his daughter. And the reason why he wants this power is to heal a plague that is decimating his land. However, he very quickly realizes that it may not be the answer to all of his problems like he assumed that it was. Once again, amazing romantic tension in this. I love the way that LJ Andrews writes romantasy, and this one I think is a little bit stronger in the world building and a lot less confusing than Broken Souls and Bones was. So this one actually did make it to my best books of the year list. I think I prefer the romance slightly in Broken Souls and Bones, although I think they're both very strong, but this one in terms of the plot and the world building, I think it was executed a little bit better, and I'm hoping to catch up to this one very, very soon. But she always says that, and does she ever? No. And then I think actually the final series that I started in 2025 was the Alex Stern series by Leigh Bardugo, which has been a low-key 5-star prediction for me for a very long time, and it did not quite achieve those heights because it is very different than anything Leigh Bardugo has written in the past, and I expected a little bit more similarities if I'm being honest. But this one is essentially a paranormal detective story following a girl called Alex Stern who can see ghosts, and because of that she's recruited into the 9th Secret Society of Yale, whose job it is to police the other 8 secret societies who all deal in the occult. So this follows the plot structure of a murder mystery predominantly, when one of the girls from the town surrounding Yale goes missing, and Alex is told not to investigate because it doesn't have anything to do with the secret societies. However, something in her won't let it go and compels her to investigate regardless. The main disconnect between me and this book was just that I expected it to be written a little bit differently, given that I've read everything that Leigh Bardugo has published in the past. But because of the main character that we follow, who is somebody who has experienced a great deal of trauma that has set her on a path in life where she kind of ended up in a hole that she couldn't get out of, and she's seeing this opportunity to attend Yale as a second chance and an opportunity to restart her life. But she has a very cold, detached manner that I think really comes across in the narration and the writing style. So tonally, this was just completely different than I expected. And this was originally supposed to be a 9-book series. I remember it being talked about when it was announced, and it was cut back to a trilogy, which I completely understand how this would have been a 9-book series, given that it does feel very much like a typical paranormal detective novel, something like the Dresden Files and things of that ilk that were published in like the early 2000s and really popular. That kind of story, like with like the old school classic urban fantasy, usually doesn't work for me. I did, however, like a lot about this book, so I am going to continue on with this series, and it's great timing because there's been big gaps between each installment in this book, and book 3 is actually going to be published in 2026, so it is a perfect time for me to be starting this one. So those were my 50 series from 2025. I don't have any concrete goals in terms of reducing this number for 2026. I do know that I want it to be less than 50, but I don't know what number is kind of realistic, so we'll leave that up in the air and just say please less than 50. I am definitely wanting to prioritize sequels. I have a new approach to reading in 2026, which I've talked about. I only want to be reading books that I'm excited about. No more giving things a try, as I've said, just for the sake of it, and being a little bit more conscious and intentional about what I'm picking up, and therefore being a little bit more excited about what I'm reading. Hopefully will push me in the right direction of finishing more series and starting slightly less. And then of course, as I very briefly mentioned, I would also like to low-key implement the goal of finishing at least 12 series in 2026, which, given the amount that we've just talked about in that last section where I've read 2 books in the last year and just didn't read the last book in the series, I definitely feel like that's doable. But down in my comments, please let me know what the last series that you completed in 2025 is, because I would love to know, and hopefully it'll give me a little jolt of motivation to finish some series myself. But also, if you want to let me know you were here but you don't feel like you have anything to say, then please leave me some sort of winter emoji for Winter House by Ben Gutterson. But aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, my Instagram and my Patreon if you want to follow me on any of those. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you will go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.